This largest ever DNA analysis of remains has shown that they carried genes from southern Europe and Asia. This intermingling with people from the south and the east diversified their genetic makeup and led to a variety of physical appearances.
Few stories in European history are as cloaked in mystery as the origins of Poland's first royal family. Historians swore they were true-born native Slavic kings until DNA shattered that belief apart.
The first historically known ruler of Poland and the founder of the Piast dynasty, Mieszko I. The Piast dynasty derives its name from the legendary figure Piast the Wheelwright.
Recent discoveries from royal tombs reveal ancestry that stretches far beyond Poland's borders, rewriting the nation's very beginnings. Could its first rulers have come from lands no one imagined? Every mystery has an origin, and this one traces back to a dynasty that turned folklore into power. To grasp the full weight of what DNA uncovered, we have to start with the rulers who were called the Piasts. Now, who were the Piasts, and how did they evolve? Poland's first royal family, the Piasts, and the myth. Well, this whole Poland story began in the 10th century, when a family known as the Piasts rose from the shadows of legend to become the first recorded rulers of Poland. Their legacy stretches from Mieszko I, who ruled around 960 CE, to Casimir III the Great, whose death in 1370 ended the dynasty's direct line. During those 4 centuries, the Piasts laid the foundation of what we now recognize as the Polish state, uniting scattered tribes, embracing Christianity, and pulling a once fragmented land into the sphere of Western Europe. Yet behind the crown and the chronicles, one question still lingers through history. Who were they, really? You see, this particular question has haunted historians for generations. Some argue that the Piasts were native Slavic nobles, born from the soil they ruled, and according to this view, they were the natural leaders of the Polans, a tribe rooted in the heart of the region that would become Poland. Another theory suggests they were Moravian exiles or immigrants who came from what is now the Czech-Slovak region and took power through upheaval or alliance. And then there's the theory that sends the imagination spinning toward the North Sea, which is the idea that these early rulers may have carried Viking blood, descendants of warrior traders who crossed rivers and marshes before seizing their place in the center of Europe. But the thing is, each of these stories carries fragments of truth, yet none fits cleanly. The origins of the Piasts remain a puzzle with missing pieces scattered across time. What makes this mystery endure is the absence of solid proof. The earliest mention of their ancestor, Piast the Wheelwright, appears in chronicles only as myth, not substantiated by contemporary records written long after his supposed lifetime. But who exactly is Piast the Wheelwright? Well, long before Poland crowned its first kings, legend spoke of a humble man named Piast the Wheelwright. He wasn't born into nobility, nor did he inherit any throne. He was said to be a simple craftsman who once welcomed 2 mysterious travelers into his modest home when a proud duke turned them away. In return for his kindness, the strangers blessed his family, foretelling that Piast's son would rule the land. Whether Piast truly lived or not remains a mystery, but his story became the foundation of Poland's royal myth. It painted the Piast dynasty as rulers chosen not by blood or conquest, but by virtue and fate. Also, archaeologists have uncovered fortresses and relics, yet none that clearly point to one origin over another. The records that do exist mix fact with folklore, leaving scholars to piece together the meaning from half-told tales and scattered bones. It's as if the Piasts themselves wanted their beginnings to stay hidden, and the deeper researchers dig, the more the story seems to twist and blur. Despite the uncertainty, the Piasts became more than rulers. They became a symbol of the early Polish royalty. To generations of Poles, They represented unity, faith, and endurance. They were the family that turned tribes into a kingdom, a dynasty that gave shape to the idea of Poland itself. Their story carried pride through invasions, partitions, and wars, showing people where they came from, even when the truth of that origin was uncertain. The Piasts were not only a royal line, they were a mirror of national identity. And that's what makes the latest discovery so startling. For centuries, the legend of their homegrown roots stood firm. Now, science is whispering something entirely different. As we move deeper into this story, the old image of Poland's first royal family begins to crack. And what lies beneath those cracks could change everything we thought we knew. It's one thing to believe a story told by chroniclers. It's another to test it against what the earth itself remembers. This is exactly what happened when archaeologists began digging into Poland's royal past. The archaeological breakthrough. The search for Poland's royal beginnings didn't stop at legends or chronicles. It led scientists deep into the stone heart of Płock Cathedral, one of the oldest seats of Polish kings. There, under centuries of quiet and candlelight, an excavation team began uncovering what history had long kept buried. Hidden among the royal tombs were bodies dating between 1100 and 1495 CE. It is literally a window into nearly 4 centuries of Piast rule. Leading this delicate work was Marek Figlerowicz, a molecular biologist with a vision that reached far beyond archaeology. He gathered a team of experts like historians, geneticists, and field scientists, each determined to piece together a family story that written history alone could never tell. Marek Figlerowicz and his team identified 33 individuals believed to have lived and died during the Piast era. Out of these deceased bodies were 30 men, 3 women, and countless possibilities about where Poland's first royal bloodline truly began. Now, this process was meticulous. First, the scientists handled the remains with extreme care, removing soil that had held them for centuries and preparing them for genetic analysis. Small samples from bones and teeth were collected, purified, and placed into advanced sequencing machines designed to pull out fragments of ancient DNA. To most people, it might look like science fiction. In truth, it's science slowly unveiling what the tombs had locked away, and what those machines read was far more than strands of data. They revealed biological footprints, the genetic code that passes silently from parent to child over generations. The Y chromosome, inherited through the male line, became the key to unlocking the Piast mystery. And when the results appeared, they carried surprises that no medieval chronicler could have imagined. This was no ordinary study. It was the most detailed genetic investigation of a royal dynasty ever attempted in Poland. The team had managed to connect physical evidence from crypts and royal chapels to a broader genetic map that stretched across Europe. And for the first time, modern science was offering something the old legends could never have. At first, it started as a routine genetic comparison meant to trace local connections within Poland. However, when the results came in, one detail refused to fit. How could the genetic code of Poland's first rulers point to a land across the sea? The shocking DNA discovery. What started as a routine DNA analysis quickly turned into a revelation that would shake the foundation of Polish history. When Marek Figlerowicz and his team examined the Y chromosomes of 30 male skeletons linked to the Piast dynasty, they stumbled upon something that no one expected. Nearly all of them carried a rare genetic signature, one mostly found in Britain, not Central Europe. Among the closest known matches was a man buried in eastern Scotland in the 5th or 6th century, believed to have been part of the ancient Pictish tribes. Suddenly, the Piast's bloodline looked very much foreign than anyone had ever imagined. and the discovery hit like a crack. If this data was accurate, then the earliest kings of Poland may have carried paternal roots from the far reaches of the North Atlantic. For generations, scholars told the story of Poland's first rulers as native-born Slavic leaders, chieftains who united their people and built a kingdom from their own soil. Yet the DNA suggested otherwise. It hinted at ancestors who may have crossed seas long before the Piast dynasty took power. That revelation forced historians to look at old maps and chronicles with new eyes, wondering how far this family's journey might have stretched. Historians began considering what could explain such a result, and one possible theory began to emerge. This theory suggested that the Piasts descended from a migrating group that arrived centuries before Mieszko I's reign, an outsider lineage that slowly embedded itself into the local until it rose to power. Whatever it is, the idea of an unbroken Slavic royal bloodline began to crumble. It wasn't betrayal to history. It was the evolution of it. And it made the Piasts' story more mysterious and far more complicated. If their roots reached farther west, what else about the story of Poland's beginnings had been misunderstood? The science alone was fascinating, but there was also a deeply human element behind it. What if a 10th-century Polish ruler whose great-grandfathers may have once walked the rocky coastlines of Scotland? These aren't far-fetched tales. They're plausible chapters in a history that science has only begun to uncover. And in medieval Europe, where alliances stretched across borders and seas, bloodlines were not simply inherited. They were traded, forged, and reshaped through power, faith, and war. While this discovery rewrote the royal family's ancestry, it also aligned with a larger story happening in the land itself. Around the 9th and 10th centuries, the Polish landscape was undergoing a dramatic transformation. Studies from Lake Lednica show a sharp drop in tree pollen, replaced by evidence of cereals and pasture grasses. Forests were being cleared at a massive scale, giving way to farmland, villages, and new trade routes. Even smoke and soot in the soil tell of burning fields and rapid expansion. This seemed like it was the birth of an economy, and possibly the opportunity for a foreign elite to take root amid change. The Piast dynasty didn't rise really in isolation. They emerged in a world shifting from tribal communities to organized states, from wilderness to commerce. And now, through DNA, the face of that transformation seems broader than anyone believed. Their paternal story may have started across the sea, carried through generations, before taking root in a land that would one day call itself Poland. So if the first Polish kings might have had foreign blood, what does that mean for Poland itself and everything that came after them? The ripple effects. Why it changes everything. In the grand puzzle of medieval Europe, kingdoms were never isolated pieces. The new discovery about the Piast dynasty reveals how deeply the continent's stories were intertwined. While textbooks or the regular articles often frame history as local families seizing power, the truth is more tangled. Trade, migration, marriage alliances, and raw ambition created webs that reached across seas and forests. The DNA findings from the Piasts place them directly in that web, and suddenly, Poland no longer sits quietly on the edge of Europe. It stands at the heart of it. One of the most fascinating contrasts in the research lies between the rulers and the people they governed. Genetic work shows that ordinary Polish populations have roots going back to the Iron Age, showing remarkable continuity over thousands of years. In other words, the bulk of the people who worked the land, raised their children, built their homes, and carried traditions remained largely local in ancestry. Meanwhile, just like we said earlier, the Piast rulers, the very men who led these people, carried a Y chromosome more common in Britain, similar to one found in an ancient grave in eastern Scotland. What this suggests is that the dynasty that ruled may have carried a paternal lineage that came from well beyond Poland's borders while governing a population whose roots ran deep into that land. This pattern hints at threads of trade, Viking Age movement, and political marriage stretching between Britain, the North Sea, the Baltic, and Central Europe. The roots of amber, slaves, traders, and warriors all converged in places that today form parts of Poland. What if a foreign elite connected to these networks found its way into the rising pious state? What if marriage alliances tied Scottish or Atlantic elites to Polish rulers so that power, not just land, flowed across regions? The phenomenon of ruling dynasties with international roots doesn't solely apply to Poland. Throughout medieval Europe, power often traveled rather than stayed put. Kings married queens from distant lands, nobles recruited foreign warriors, and elites traded alliances like currency. In that context, a dynasty whose male line traced to the Atlantic world while ruling over a local population becomes less strange and more of a reflection on how power worked. The local people kept their lives, traditions, and ancestry, while the elite spun a different story of mobility, strategy, and connection. Also, this helps us understand identity and heritage in medieval times. Today, we often think in terms of nation, ethnicity, and local bloodline. But the past didn't operate on those modern terms. Being Polish in the 10th century meant something different than it does today. It could mean being loyal to a ruler, sharing faith and law, or living in the same economic zone, not necessarily sharing the same paternal ancestors. The Piast story shows that what mattered in heritage wasn't always where your ancestors were buried, but who you allied with, how you ruled, and how you navigated change. So when we place the Piast findings into that broader context, several truths come into sharp relief. Medieval Europe was fluid, and men who sat on thrones might have gazed over lands they never stepped foot in during childhood. If Poland's first ruling family may have traveled across seas or married into new lineages, what about other dynasties we assume to be indigenous? For people who trace their roots back through generations of farmers, builders, and craftsmen, this discovery stirs something unexpected. The story they thought began in their own backyard might reach far beyond it. The Piast lineage now carries the memory of migration, trade, and alliance, a network that tied Poland to the greater story of Europe long before borders took shape. Suddenly, identity feels less like a closed circle and more like a thread woven into something vast and unpredictable. Across centuries, the myth of the Piasts was built on native power. Now that image evolves. A foreign bloodline didn't erase the Polish spirit. It strengthened it. By merging with local traditions, the dynasty created a state that stood between East, West, North, and South. This new perspective doesn't take away from national pride. It deepens it, showing that the Polish story was never isolated. It was only part of the movement that shaped medieval Europe. For modern descendants, these findings are somewhat striking. Someone in Krakow or Łódź might look at an old family record or heirloom and wonder if it carries traces of those same journeys. The faces in faded photographs may now represent more than regional history. They might reflect distant connections, the kind that cross mountains and oceans. Identity, in this light, becomes something richer than bloodlines. It's a mix of endurance, adaptation, and stories passed through both time and genes. The truth is, the first royal family of Poland might not have been a symbol of isolation, but of connection. And that realization makes us wonder, if this hidden lineage could change the story of one kingdom, what else might still be waiting to be uncovered across Europe's royal past. History may have given us the story, but science is now holding the magnifying glass. What more can DNA still reveal about the lives we thought we already understood? Scientific impact and future research directions. What began as a medieval legend has quietly grown into a scientific revolution. The Piast DNA research didn't just fill a few gaps in Poland's royal history. It opened a new chapter in how we study the past itself. Across the world, historians and geneticists are now using ancient DNA to revisit old stories that were once accepted as fact. From Viking burials in Scandinavia to Egyptian mummies, genetic analysis is revealing lineages, migrations, and forgotten connections that even the best-written chronicles could never capture. The Piast project proved that DNA can do what time and politics could not. Since the results were published, new initiatives have taken shape in universities and archaeological teams across Europe. Some are focused on expanding the genetic database of medieval Poland, hoping to trace how the Piasts mixed with neighboring dynasties. Others are examining burial sites linked to minor royal lines and distant nobles, whose identities have long been debated. What once required decades of guesswork can now be tested in a lab in a matter of days. This wave of discovery has encouraged a broader question. If science can reveal the truth about Poland's founding dynasty, what other royal stories might need rewriting? From Bohemia to Hungary, and even as far as France, historians are re-evaluating medieval family trees that were built more on myth than biology. The implications go far beyond borders. Every new finding shifts how we understand identity, power, and heritage, not as fixed ideas, but as living, evolving stories. In the coming years, scientists hope to push this research even further. The goal is to collect more samples, verify earlier findings, and explore genetic links between rulers and the broader population. Advances in sequencing technology mean that even the most fragile remains can now reveal astonishing detail. Researchers are learning to reconstruct faces, trace migrations, and map ancient trade routes, all through DNA. For historians and geneticists, this moment feels like a turning point. It's showing that truth can be found not only in libraries, but deep within the biological record of humanity itself. Each DNA sequence recovered adds another voice to the conversation about who we are and where we came from. And for the public, it shows that ancestry and identity are far more layered than we might imagine. And although the Piasts' rule ended in 1370, their story refuses to fade. In fact, it's only now being told in full. It continues in laboratories, in museum archives, and in the soil of Poland. What was once thought to be a closed chapter is now reopening through science. If DNA can shake the foundations of Poland's oldest dynasty, what might it reveal about the rest of Europe's royal families? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. To enjoy more content like this, click on the next video on your screen.